Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekulona, and this is Nashville. It's been 39 years since the Fairgrounds Speedway hosted a NASCAR race, but a new proposal to rebuild the track would change that. The costs? Millions. Support? That's a mixed bag. Mayor John Cooper is enthusiastic about the proposal, and he's got racing fans in his corner. Opponents have concerns like noise, parking, and pollution. So what about Nashville's racing traditions and the future of the Fairgrounds Speedway? That's coming up later this hour. But first, it's time for At Us. Each week, we take time to read the comments so you don't have to. Yes, I am encouraging you to literally add us on Twitter at This Is Nashville and on Instagram at ThisIsNashville_WPLN. Joining me now with a look back at the last week is our digital lead, Anna Gallegos-Cannon. Hey, Anna.
Hey, Khalil. You know, it's always good to be back in studio, especially when our listeners have a lot to say.
You know, that is always good to hear. You know, we did touch on some pretty intense topics over the past week, like Tuesday's episode about policing in light of the killing of Tyree Nichols in Memphis.
So during that show, we received a few listener recommendations on how to change police culture and reduce violent confrontations, including one recommendation was teaching officers Aikido.
Okay.
On Instagram, Jenny left us a comment saying, quote, "Put pressure on police unions to improve their standards. It can't be the police are untouchable mentality. If pensions were on the line, these police officers wouldn't be committing crimes against the community." We also received a question from Jacob on Twitter who asked, quote, "Did y'all just let your guests say that our Nashville leadership supports white supremacy by funding the police? I'm so disappointed that there wasn't at least some sort of rebuttal to that."
All right. So to Jacob's feedback, that was in response to a few comments made in the episode. Let's revisit exactly what they said. Here's our guest, Erica Perry, with the Black Nashville Assembly.
To transform public safety is going to require political will. And right now that political will isn't there because many of our elected officials are invested in white supremacy. And we see that in how they vote on whether to give more money to housing, whether to really fund education, to make sure support staff have what they need, the salaries they need to really be able to live in Nashville. We see that through the decision whether to really significantly invest in community centers or libraries. And so this commitment to white supremacy shows up in how they fund policing and what policies they pass to really reduce the size and scope of police.
And earlier in the episode, Michaela McCree with the Police Community Oversight Board called law enforcement, quote, "a tool of white supremacy," end quote. So what do we think, Anna?
So policing being called a tool of white supremacy isn't exactly a new idea, and there's actually some data to back it up. So in 2006 and 2015, the FBI published reports on the infiltration of white supremacy in police departments. And more recently, in 2020, there was actually a congressional hearing on this topic. Of course, we don't want to paint police officers with a broad brush and say that anyone and everyone who works in law enforcement is racist, because that is 100% not true. Mm-hmm. But we know that racial bias does exist within police departments, and it does have a real impact on our communities. And we invited guests with a good grasp of that issue to join us and share their perspective, which, you know, they did.
Exactly. That's exactly what we did. And that's exactly what This Is Nashville is all about. We're having people come on to discuss the issues that affect us here in Nashville and Middle Tennessee. And dare I say, I think we would invite anybody from the police department to come onto the show and to talk about that. Now, on to Tennessee's Department of Children's Services. That was the focus of last Thursday's show. And I'm curious what listeners had to say about that one.
So we received a very kind response from Jennifer on Twitter, who wrote, "At This Is Nashville is out there doing the good work of humanizing the systematic failures of Tennessee DCS. I'm thankful for at Campbell for Tennessee and at Vote Gloria J for amplifying and addressing this inhumanity. Tennessee deserves better," end quote.
Okay, now we'll definitely be keeping an eye on what happens at DCS. The Tennessee legislature is considering a number of ways to reform DCS, including bills to make adoption and fostering easier, and one, capping the number of cases for DCS social workers. What else we got?
You know, we say this every single week, and I'm sure our listeners may be a little bit tired of it. But, you know, an hour is just not enough time.
No, it never is.
We couldn't get to every question during Wednesday's Citizen Nashville episode on eviction, but our guest, Elizabeth Lyserson, with the Legal Aid Society, and Julie Iriart of the Nashville Hispanic Bar Association, stuck around to answer a question about eviction court. So the question is from Ashley, who tweeted at us saying, quote, "It's confusing that everything happens in hallway conversations. What advice do you have for tenants who are talking to attorneys in the court hallways? Sometimes renters don't even know they are talking to in these moments." And you know what? That is a really good question. So here's what our guests had to say, starting with Elizabeth.
Couple of things that are really important. Number one, the person you're talking to works for your landlord. They're your landlord's attorney. They're someone who works in that office. That's not the person who is representing you. Number two, if you can reach an agreement with them, great. You should absolutely try. That's part of why it's so important to go to court, because then once you're in court, you have somebody who's going to actually sit down across from you and say, here's the amount you owe. When can you pay it? Do you want to stay? When could you leave? So all of those questions that maybe you've been trying to get an answer from the property manager or the front office about, you can get answered there. So go to court, go to those conversations, and try to reach an agreement. One thing I always want folks to be careful of is if you sign something and they say, hey, sign here, we'll give you some amount of time to pay, and you don't have to come back to court again. Ask questions about what you're signing, because you might be signing a judgment against you. You might be signing an order that says this person agrees they're behind on rent and can be evicted. You might have an agreement with your landlord that, hey, you signed this judgment, they're going to give you a little bit of time. But be really careful about what you sign. And if you get an agreement with your landlord, get the terms in writing so that you know what are you paying, by when, how, with all of these details written out for you, so you are very clear on what the process is.
Julie, I see you nodding your head. Anything you want to add?
Yeah. Right now, we're seeing these landlord attorneys or like agents from their firms having people sign agreements where they're agreeing to give possession or the physical apartment back to the landlord. And that's what it says on the paper. Also, take pictures of the papers that you're signing so you have a copy of that. But then there's like a side agreement that's only oral agreement where the attorney or the representative is saying, sign this, but if you pay in 2 weeks, you can stay. But by signing that agreed order of possession, that gives the landlord the ability to have the sheriff come and remove your things 10 days from that day. So unless you have it in writing, it doesn't exist legally.
I am so glad that our guests were able to address that because, you know, myself and probably the average tenant would not know any of that.
Not at all. It was great to have them, just wealths of information. Now, I want to thank you, our digital lead, Anna Gallegos-Cannon, for this roundup. We will see you soon, Anna.
Of course. And our listeners know where to find me online.
Don't forget to add us on Twitter and Instagram, and let's keep the comments coming. Also, fill out our community survey to let us know what topics you want us to cover at thisisnashville.org. It's super easy and quick and helps us produce shows with your needs and interests in mind. We have to take a short break. When we come back, we'll explore more about Nashville's history with racing and learn what racing means to the city. Are you a racing fan? Have you seen a race at the Fairgrounds Speedway? Tweet us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekulona, and this is Nashville. Weaving in and out of cars at 100 plus miles an hour? Now that's a thrill. And no, I'm not talking about driving on I-40, though we see y'all. We really do. I'm talking about NASCAR. Nashville's Fairgrounds Speedway hasn't hosted a NASCAR race since the 80s. In its heyday, the Speedway was a popular place for fans of car racing. Now there's a proposal on the table that could bring NASCAR back. We'll talk about that proposal, which is backed by Mayor John Cooper, in a few minutes. But first, let's learn more about the culture of car racing and what it means to Nashville with our first guest. Norm Parton is a longtime racing fan and the founder of Parton & Associates, a company that organizes corporate entertainment events around racing. Norm, thanks for being here and welcome to This Is Nashville.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Really great to have you. So I understand you've been around racing your entire life. In fact, you grew up just a few blocks from the Fairgrounds Speedway. Is that right?
Block and a half, walking distance.
Well, what are some of your earliest memories of the Speedway?
When I was 5 years old, 6 years old, it was obvious there was a racetrack there. Mm-hmm. I was a regular at Fair Park. They had putt-putt golf. They had Cascade Plunge. Again, walking distance. It was kind of the neighborhood hub for the Waverly, Belmont, Wedgwood area. And I started going to car races when I was 5, dragging my parents, who did not necessarily care to go. And to kind of give you the deal is, parents go with their kids because the kids want to go. It was obvious they were not really thrilled. So our next door neighbor, that living on Neal Terrace, block and a half away, was a police officer, and he was head of security. So my parents figured out that they could take me and drop me off, and Ernest would pick me up at the gate and take me and put me in a seat, and I had to stay there to the conclusion of the races, and then he would bring me home.
So you had the fairgrounds as your own personal playground, essentially.
It really was, and there's people that baseball, hockey, soccer, that's their life. Mm-hmm. And talking with my wife last night, talking about this, I wonder, my draw to it was because I was so close. I wonder if I was living somewhere else, if I would have found that. But I became a fan, became a participant with a couple of racing teams. And as my age increased and my little business sense, I turned it into a career. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so I had radio, TV. I did sponsorship programs. Traveled to many races. I'm kind of the guy that's been there, done that, I guess you would say.
Yeah, so racing all the way throughout the entirety of your life. I've read something about the Speedway that it's the second oldest continually operating racetrack in the country. That's really cool.
That's correct.
Tell us a little bit more about the history of the track.
Okay, well, first of all, Milwaukee, the Milwaukee Mile is the oldest.
Okay.
1902. Don't hold me to that perfectly, but it's a 1900, and I think we were 1903, and then Indianapolis 500 was 1909. Mm-hmm. And those three tracks still remain pretty much in their form today. So the fairgrounds started out with a mile dirt track for horses, and this is in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. And the rich guys had stables there. Their horses stayed there. They were trained there, and they ran the buggies and horse races and that kind of stuff on a mile dirt track. Well, starting back in the early 1900s, when automobiles came about, when the second one was made, that's when the first race happened. History goes back to horseless carriages racing, and it was during the fair. And then they would run some special events. And so that went on through 1957. And an interesting note, everybody knows of Maryland Farms in Brentwood. The racing people who were promoting races in Nashville made a deal with them. They bought Maryland Farms, built the barns, built the track, and the horse people picked up and went out there, and then it became a racing facility full-time. They cut it to a half-mile paved asphalt track, And that configuration remains today.
Now, you've been in this so long. You've
Yes.
seen really good drivers, I bet.
Oh, yes.
Who are some of the notable NASCAR drivers who came up racing at the Speedway?
Well, I'm going to tell my age here. I witnessed Darrell Waltrip's first race at the Fairgrounds. He brought a car from Kentucky that could not compete, and he ended up showing so much talent that local people hired him, and he moved from Owensboro to Nashville.
Okay.
I saw Sterling Marlin run his first race, Bobby Hamilton run his first race, and hundreds of other people, not only drivers, but crew chiefs, officials, track promoters. At one time, the promoters at Atlanta and Texas motor speedways came through Nashville first. So not only is it a driver thing, it is people like me that's been in the industry but not behind the wheel.
So it's been this place, this fertile ground for NASCAR.
Yes.
All these years. And, you know, I'm thinking like currently up to today, when people think of like big time sporting events, they're thinking about the Titans. They're thinking about the Predators. And now they're thinking about Nashville FC. But racing is up there for some folks, obviously for you and people like you. Tell me, what does racing mean to Nashville?
Well, economically, it's a huge win. You know, they judge the city by beds rented out. You know, when a convention comes in, they rank it by how many people got hotel rooms. Mm-hmm. A NASCAR event will probably be 75% people coming from out of town. The other thing that it means is there are sponsor dollars in NASCAR. They're not in football. They're sponsor dollars. Sponsors on those race cars spend a lot of money. Mm-hmm. That's there to entertain their customers at races. Now, if you have a choice around the country right now, one of the hottest cities in the United States to bring people to is Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
No one denies that. How many of those sponsors are going to put the check in the box by Nashville to come here and be able to stay, mile and a half downtown in five-star hotels and rent banquet rooms and sponsor dinners for customers? So that's a huge win. Plus, the trend in NASCAR is going to short tracks. Short tracks is where the heat is right now. In fact, there's a 2-mile track in outside of Los Angeles in Fontana that they're going to tear down and make a half-mile because it's more popular. So the trend coming here is really good. And when you match that with one of the hottest cities in the United States, it's a perfect match.
All right, so as I mentioned, the track, hasn't hosted a NASCAR race since the 80s, but, there have been races that have been ongoing since then.
Yes.
What's the state of the Speedway right now?
Well, that's a tough question. I'm partial, I admit it. And I do want to say right off the bat, I am not paid by Bristol Motor Speedway.
Okay.
I have now I'm friends with them. I know them well, talk to them all the time. I'm on their team, but I am not a paid spokesperson. The racetrack has been ignored by the city for 40 years. There have been problems there that have been noted and not addressed by the city. A racetrack needs to be safer. And just like I-40, every so often you have to pave that sucker.
Oh, yeah.
There's ongoing things there, and there's no true amenities there that makes you happy to say, that's my racetrack in Nashville. I brought people in. In fact, Jasper, who's going to be on us, came to one of the events. I brought him in. We had a little suite and food and beverage, and the place is run down. And it was a national TV race, and that to me hurts me personally. First of all, I'm a taxpayer. I'm a native of Nashville. I've lived in this city my entire life, and I take pride in my city more than most people do. And for that facility to be shoved to the wayside is not fair. And that's kind of why if the Bristol thing comes in, they bring it up to current standards that you can sit back and say, that's my city and that's my racetrack, whether you're a fan or not.
Well, let's talk about this proposal that's working its way through the Fair Board Commission that would give Bristol the green light to build up an updated speedway.
Right.
Now, I should say we invited a representative of Bristol to be on the show, but they were not available.
Right.
But Norm, like you said, you've worked closely with them. What are some of your thoughts about this proposal?
Just as a matter of fact, in my history, I started at Bristol in 1997 or 98. My memory does not allow me to get any closer than that, with having tickets that I had for corporate customers to go to a race there. And as my business grew, I ended up getting a suite, and then ended up getting 2 suites, and then ended up getting 3. And this is the day and time where every NASCAR race was a sellout. This is pre-COVID when you couldn't get tickets. I've done business with Bristol since that time. I know them well. I know their integrity. I know their character. I know their dreams, and I know how they operate, which makes me extremely proud that they would come to our city and be wanting to invest here and bring something to Nashville that obviously would not happen without them.
Do you like the proposal?
Absolutely. Mayor Cooper, his deal was when he was elected and it was being talked about, he said, as long as you don't hold taxpayers to where they are funding on a regular basis this racetrack, then we can work a deal. So they worked literally for 2 years coming up with all of these finance programs that pretty much ensures that the city will not only not be in the hole, but will be cash flow positive to the general fund, which is the goal of this. Should be the goal of everything that the city does. We want to be positive cash flow.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekulona. We're talking this hour about the proposal to renovate Nashville's Fairgrounds Speedway. Share your thoughts by tweeting us at This Is Nashville. Now, I'd like to bring in my next guest, who lives in the neighborhood near the Speedway. Terry Vo is with the Chestnut Hill Neighborhood Group, and she joins us now. Terry, thanks for being with us. Welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you so much for having me.
So it's really a pleasure to have you here. How do folks in Chestnut Hill, how do they feel about this proposal?
Yeah, I definitely feel that we don't believe that the deal is in the best interest of not only our neighborhood, but the entire surrounding areas and neighborhoods that surround the fairgrounds.
What concerns do you have about the potential rebuild of the Speedway?
I have 10. We won't go over all 10.
Okay.
But, for us, we really want to kind of make sure that the deal is in the best interest of everyone, just like Norm was talking about. We don't want it on the taxpayers. So, for example, are we going to include financial penalties if there are, for example, curfews that's been exceeded, or a lot of issue has been around noise concern. So if that's the case and they do exceed a noise threshold, what will happen, right? And is it just saying, please don't do that again? Or is there really going to be implications, penalties where we are all monitoring and doing what's best by our neighborhood? Another thing, we want to see is that we want to see BMS, backing the full amount of the bond debt. Seeing that, we would then feel that, we're all invested, we're all doing what's best, and we're looking out not only financially, but operationally, and caring about everyone who is living next to the Speedway.
Now, speaking of next to the Speedway, Geodis Park is right next to the Speedway, and that's the home of Nashville SC. It's a pretty massive project that the city worked on for a while, and it opened last May to the public. What was the process like for you and your neighbors as Geodis Park was getting developed?
Definitely. I would say that there was a community benefits agreement. There's lots of meetings. Even before the stadium opened, we had a representative come talk about, egress and ingress, about traffic. We were very concerned, wanting to make sure how that was going to be addressed. And we know there's issues. Mm-hmm. It's not perfect. And I think that's something we can really take and learn about how to make sure we really focus on that with the improvements made to the Speedway.
Is there currently a CBA for the Speedway proposal?
Not that I am aware of, and that's what I put in for one of our concerns that we would love to have addressed.
Norm,
Yes.
Do you think a CBA would be good to have? That's a community benefits agreement where the developer comes in and agrees to add these things to the community. Do you think that
They've already done that?
They've done that.
They've done that. They're already participating. So, and without getting into the whole list, the NASCAR banquet was here last December. And Bristol brought in Daniel Suarez, who is Mexican descent, and took him to a location full of Hispanic children. They did a full day of video games, him talking. They sent his crew chief to Glencliff High School, where their automotive department and the crew chief went there, and they talked about racing all day long. They invited the Boys and the Girls Club. They've adopted them. So they do this already without having to be told. That makes a huge difference.
I do want to say this. That's nice that they brought Daniel Suarez's name, that they brought him in and introduced him to young members of the community. But a community benefits agreement is something that really sets up and establishes, hey, we're going to invest in these parks. We're going to invest.
That's what they've done. They have adopted Fall Hamilton School. They have adopted Journey Home. They have adopted the Boys and the Girls Club with an agreement in writing, without being asked, because that's what they do everywhere they are. And another thing that they do is they have Speedway children's charities, to where from a grassroots effort, they get 5-gallon buckets and walk through the stands and people throw coins in, to hosting events, black tie events, that's, $500,000 a table type things. And they raise money to give to children's charities. Now, pre-COVID, Bristol Motor Speedway did just under $1 million a year giving checks to different schools, all related to children. And I would be glad to furnish you with a list of those. And they do a neat thing at the Christmas time. They bring all the charities in, and you're in a car. And you line up on the racetrack, and you come to the start-finish line. They have checker flags and the big check, like in Victory Lane. And they're giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to these places,
well,
without being made to do it.
Again, that sounds really wonderful, but I think the people of Nashville, particularly that neighborhood, would like to see some efforts made towards there. Now, we have a tweet from journalist Nikki Wood at Nashmellow. I like that. On Twitter, they write, "I can hear it from my house 6 miles away. I wonder what it's like nearer to the track." Terry, what can you tell us about that?
Definitely. We were at a public hearing recently, and one neighbor was talking about how when the racing is happening, they cannot talk to their family members in the living room together. So that is a huge issue of concern, not only for families, children, for the noise. If someone can hear it 6 miles away, for someone who's living nearby, they can't even communicate with one another. And I think that's something we should really, really talk about and break down.
What would the neighborhood group like to see change in the proposal?
Gosh, so many things. We definitely want it to be something that we're all working on together, right? I think the process in itself could have been improved because why weren't we there at the beginning and bringing in requests and what neighbors would like to see, and then forming it together so that, now when we're looking at it, we're trying to tweak little, this and that, when it could have been stronger from the beginning. And so I think biggest thing we want to see, implementation of like what penalties look like if, from sound to curfew is affected. We want to know that the monitoring is happening all throughout, during the major events, and that we're actually seeing the data for that. And we're all aware, right? It's transparent. And we definitely want, we want to know, are there spaces for neighborhood events, nonprofits, community meetings at the Speedway? When Norm was talking about all these great things, to my awareness, we've never been invited, like as a neighborhood association, to come and experience, a race. And these are the things we're talking about, because I think that's critical. And people who live nearby, if, their only experience is that it's interrupting their quality of life, we need to understand that as well.
Now, I know there's another community meeting coming up soon. What are your hopes for that meeting?
Yes, I hope that, of course, people will write in, people will attend, and that we can really talk about where we can go. If this is the proposal that is going to move forward, how can we make it the strongest, and really address and listen to the neighborhoods and those who are going to be impacted the greatest.
Well, what questions do you have for the city?
Goodness. For the city, definitely, when we were negotiating, are we, really reviewing what this impact looks like in 30 years? I think the bond is a huge concern. Why is it not fully backed by the person, by BMS if they are going to be the operator? And what are we doing in terms of environmental impact study? Like, we have not done that. What are we doing in terms of a community impact mitigation, list? And so adding these things, being strong and having one voice as a city is important too.
Terry Vo is with the Chestnut Hill Neighborhood Group. Terry, thank you for being with us today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Norm Parton will stick with us through the break. When we come back, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the proposal. How do you feel about the proposed renovation of Nashville's Fairgrounds Speedway? Tweet us at This Is Nashville. We'll be right back. I'm Khalil Ekulona, and this is Nashville. We've been talking this hour about the Fairgrounds Speedway. It's a Nashville institution that has held horse and car races since 1904. The Speedway hasn't seen a NASCAR race since the 80s, but it has hosted other local and regional races. In 2011, Nashville voters asked for the city to maintain the track. And now there's a proposal backed by Mayor John Cooper to renovate the track and hopefully attract big races like NASCAR. Let's dig a little deeper into that proposal now. My next guests are Jason Bergeron, a former commissioner of the Fairgrounds Board, and the current vice chair of the board, Jasper Hendricks. Thank you both for being with us. Welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
So, Jasper, let's start with you. Tell us, what is in the proposal?
So what is in the proposal? The proposal is pretty much to renovate an existing city facility. As you know, the racetrack is owned by Metro government. It is in much need of repair. And I think, as Norm mentioned in the last segment, I did have the opportunity. I've gone to a few events over there, and especially hosting a televised event. It was pretty embarrassing for the city to have a nationally televised race with millions of viewers, but your school board doesn't work. And the facilities that are not adequate, is not ADA compliant, and so on and so forth. So we can continue to name, the many problems that's with the existing facility. And so what this proposal does is to allow the city to work with a private entity to renovate this facility. And in exchange, this private entity will then will pay rent starting at $1 million a year, and it's going to go up over the course of 30 years, along with sponsorship dollars for this entity. And then also there's an amendment to allow the Visitors and Convention Bureau to rent the facility for 20 days a year, providing rent also to help cover the cost of the facility.
All right, so it's clear that this racetrack is not fit to host an event like NASCAR. What would some of the renovations in the proposal, what do they entail?
So it will be to build a 30,000-seat grandstand, along with banquet facilities, community space that the last guest, Terry, had mentioned was needed or could be used. So there will be community space there as well. And then also improvements to the restroom facilities and also making it ADA compliant. Right now, a person with a disability, and especially a person with a wheelchair, cannot attend cannot attend the races.
How much would all of this cost?
We're waiting on the final numbers now. We're going through that process. We do have a work session tonight in which we will probably hear some of the initial estimates, but we're looking at somewhere around $100 million.
Okay, so $100 million potentially. Who's covering these costs?
So the city will, the idea of the proposal is that the city will issue bonds through the Metro Sports Authority, and the payment of those bonds will be covered by the amount of rent that Bristol Motor Speedway, along with the Nashville Visitors and Convention Bureau, will be bringing to the table, along with sponsorship dollars.
All right, now, Jason, I see you want to respond, but let me ask you this first.
Yeah.
I'll give you a chance to respond. You know, you used to be on the Fairgrounds Board Commission. Tell us when, I need a sense of a timeline here. When did Bristol first come to the table with these plans to renovate?
Well, Bristol actually came to the table back in, to be involved back as far back as like 2016, 2017, when there was a previous RFP to extend the Speedway promoter contract. And they weren't successful in large part at that time because they wanted to do so much more activity. And I'd love to talk about what this new proposal is, because it's a lot more of that. So then they really started to come back around in 2018, 2019 with the idea that became this current proposal. And I started meeting with Bristol as a representative of the Fair Board in the summer of 2019. Now, I will say that previous administrations, the Berry administration, the Briley administration, Briley administration officials have told me that, you know, they did not want to move forward with this. So that really changed once Mayor Cooper was moved into office, and he had a different opinion of moving ahead with this because the prior administrations didn't want to.
All right, so what are your thoughts on this current proposal?
Right. So I think we have to be clear first. This is not just a quaint renovation. I am so impressed by Mr. Parton's fondness for the past and the halcyon days of racing long ago and that experience. This experience is going to be very different than his fond childhood memories. This is a complete teardown of the existing facility. Bristol wants to call it a renovation to make it seem a little more quaint. I mean, they're tearing the whole thing down and rebuilding it. Okay. But it is. It's a brand new thing on the same site. So it's not really a historic revitalization. So it is, you know, a facility that will go from, right now we have two things that is status quo. 10 race weekends, which have curfews and controls for local racing. And we have these things called track rentals, 25 of them a year for 4 hours a day, where racing teams get to test their cars. That was a really controversial thing. A few years ago, it used to be 80, 100 days a year without limits, and they wouldn't pay for that, which I think is wild. And when I started negotiating those contracts for the Fair Board, we put in some limits, and we're in a really good place right now. I think we're in a really good place with the status quo. But what this facility will bring is one or two bigger races, and there's nothing that stops Bristol from doing more races. This will bring 20 Convention and Visitors Bureau events. The Convention and Visitors Bureau won't even say what those are. Somewhere in the mix, there's several concerts, there's corporate events. There are maybe other uses with loud cars, like driving experiences, racing schools, things Bristol's parent company does at other tracks. And right now, this contract has a lot of loopholes that would allow unlimited uses for those. That needs to be fixed. So what this is not necessarily more the status quo, at least not right now. We can improve this deal, maybe to make it not as impactful, but there's a lot more to this. And in a lot of ways, what this is, and Norm just talked about it, 75% of people coming from out of town for NASCAR races. This is, you know, very much a downtown tourism type of facility being put into the neighborhoods. And without limits and without major fixes to this deal, the question is where are we as a city, right? Like, is the whole city just to be handed over for the next tourism play? Or does there need to be some balance in context of, well, this thing is in neighborhoods, this isn't downtown?
Jasper, you want to respond?
Yes. So in the proposal, there are only 10 races, and there is a cap to 20 race day, 20 practice days, track run days. So that is already in there. There are some amendments that we are that some of the commissioners and especially myself are preparing to do once we go through this process. Now, one thing that Mr. Bergeron has to understand is that he is no longer on the Fair Board, so he's not privy to some of the conversations that we are having with Metro Legal to see what we are capable of doing. And so we do hear the concerns of the community folks. And then if you watch back over some of my questions of Fair Board meetings I've been asking, the Visitors Bureau, like, what are those types of events? They will have the same restrictions and the same curfews that currently exist. So there will not be any events after a certain period of time. There will not be a level of sound. Also, with sound for racing, part of the proposal is the requirement of a sound wall that is made with certain specifications, so that the goal is to reduce the current level of sound to 50% or less. So we are working to make the improvements. And also NASCAR is looking at various different ways. They're testing mufflers for NASCAR, their new generation vehicles. I've had conversations with NASCAR folks about that. Also electric vehicles. By the time this track is done, NASCAR already has a mandate where they're looking at most of their vehicles being electric by 2025. We're looking at a 2026 completion date, for this racetrack. So the level of noise, is there. But also, I don't think that these same considerations were made when the soccer stadium was being debated by the former board. Is because now, instead of in addition to soccer, there are concerts that are being scheduled. You have Shania Twain and Pink that are coming to Geodis Park, this year. But we are at a place as the current board trying to make sure that those considerations are being made, so that way we can avoid some of the problems. I don't think that the previous board did enough to make sure that there was adequate parking or transportation plan for Geodis Park. And to say that, now Bristol Motors is coming in and they have to be responsible for all of these things is not 100%, fair. To them as well. But it's going to take all three entities, the Fair Board, the Nashville Soccer Club, and Bristol Motors, to sit down at the table to figure out fixes to all of these problems.
All right, thank you for that. I didn't know Pink was coming to town. I'm down to see her. If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekulona. We're talking this hour about the proposal to renovate the Fairgrounds Speedway with Jason Bergeron, Jasper Hendricks, and Norm Parton. Tweet us your thoughts at This Is Nashville. Longtime racing fan Norm Parton is still with us. Norm, what is your response to these
Well, I have
concerns?
several. We went through the thing. Can't talk in your living room. When I was general manager of the racetrack in 2004 to 2006, we did not have mufflers. And there was neighbors that would complain and so forth. So every Saturday night during the late model race, which is the loudest, I would be on a golf cart going through the neighborhood, and I would stop and talk to people. And I went in living rooms. I talked to people that had lived there 10 years. I talked to people that had been there since birth. Not a single one could show me that in their living room they could not talk. There's a homeowner on Byron Avenue that I spoke with last Sunday that says, when they're racing outside is very difficult. He is within yards of the racetrack, plus up on a hill in a new house. He says, I watch TV all the time. And I can hear it, but I can talk and have TV on in my house, and he's in the line of sight. So I challenge anyone to put me in their living room and say we can't talk while there's races going on. Now that there's mufflers, it took me, I challenged that theory 100%.
We can't fact check what you're saying right now, but so let's move on. Jason, what changes would you like to see in the proposal? I mean, you've lived in the area for 20 years. What changes would you and some of your community members like to see?
A big thing is accountability. And Terry talked about some things, right? First and foremost, Bristol needs to backstop the full debt for this facility. Otherwise, all the promises they make will not count for anything. Nashville SC had to guarantee the full debt. It should be fair.
And they got 10 free acres.
That has nothing to.
Oh, yes, it does. Okay. You give me 10 free acres, I will back the bonds.
I understand how passionate you are, Norm. Okay,
let's give Jason a chance to respond.
Yeah, please. So the mixed use development has nothing to do with it. The fact of the matter is the user should backstop the full debt of the facility they claim their events will pay for. Accountability for curfews, noise. And penalties for those if they don't comply. Accountability to the fairgrounds, to the neighborhoods, to the affordable housing units that'll be there, and a couple things on noise and about accountability. And that I'll focus on those. One, Mr. Pardon made some comments, and unfortunately, I think there are some folks who it's hard to take seriously Bristol's promises all the time when the contract doesn't have real limits, real controls, and real accountability. And it starts with their leader, their owner, Marcus Smith of SMI. Last year, at a time when they were making a lot of promises about being a good neighbor, one evening after a hearing, there was a really awful tweet and I have a copy of it here. I can't show it on radio, that a person made saying they hope that the noise is so loud when NASCAR comes back that one of the concerned community members they had a photo of cried out in agony and her dog got sick on the floor. I think that's awful, and I think that's a bad message to send from the leader. And he retweeted that to his 10,000 followers. So I think Bristol has a long way to go to show that they're willing to be accountable and they get the concerns. But to Norm's other comment about monitoring, that's the whole point. Let's monitor it and make them accountable. We have people who are going to be living in affordable housing units. That was a big part of the real community benefits agreement Nashville SC signed. And when I met with the mayor last fall and told him, sir, there can't be such an increase of events, all these uses I've talked about, all the extra concerts, convention events, all that. There can't be such an outsized impact that the affordable housing fails on the site. And Mayor Cooper told me, well, we should have never built those units, so it doesn't matter what happens to them. That's a problem from the design of this proposal. It can be fixed with accountability and real engagement, real community benefits being provided by Bristol. They just have to engage. It is fixable, and I've been glad to hear Commissioner Hendricks has done some work so far on that. He said a lot of good things, but we haven't seen that on paper yet, and we really need to.
Now, Jasper, there's been a lot of public hearings that you've been at. What have you been hearing from people in the community?
The major thing is noise. That's been the concern, but then some of those concerns around noise, there was one person stood up and said that, her teacher friend said it's hard to teach when there's a race going on. Well, there are no races that goes on, so it's hard to believe some people when they're in opposition to it because they've been given a lot of not truths, about this. And so, one of those things is there is a community benefits. There has been a community benefits commitment, and I only know about that because when the mayor first asked me to be on this committee, the first thing I did was Google to figure out what is going on over there. And I found a community benefits commitment that was presented in December of 2021. So over a year ago. Now, and that includes things like that Bristol Motor Speedway is committing to pay people at least $15.50 an hour, along with the relationships with Boys and Girls Club that Norm spoke about, but also the commitment with schools. Now, does it go far enough? No, to me, it doesn't. However, Tennessee law says that we cannot enter into community benefits, any type of community benefits agreement, it has to be two private entities. And I think the real problem that some people have about this community benefits agreement is because it's not the same certain players at the table that are part of this discussion. Is that Bristol Motor Speedway decided to work with other people, and so like the North Nashville Consortium of community development corporations, who are about five churches in North Nashville area that works on certain issues when it comes to affordable housing and diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making sure that there are certain measures that are being made and not some other people who are.
I understand there's another public meeting coming up, right?
Yeah, so we have a work session tonight, and then we have a public hearing. We have our regular Fair Board meeting on next Tuesday. Then we have a public hearing on February 20th, and then we have another work session on February 23rd. All of those meetings are open to the public. They are recorded and broadcasted on Metro Television and are placed on YouTube. and people, other than the work session themselves, people have opportunities to come in and provide public comment. So for our regular scheduled meetings, there are 2-minute comment periods. For our public hearing, there's 2 hours pretty much of when people can express themselves.
Now, hearing everybody's position and understanding this, would it be fair to say that the Speedway, the Board Commission, the city, Bristol Motor Speedway has not done a good job in communicating what the plan is and what the intentions are for the community? Can we agree in saying that?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
No.
One yes, one no, one impartial. Well, we're going to have to leave it right there. We'll be revisiting this topic. I want to thank you so much for being on the show and getting us under the hood of this. Jasper Hendricks is the vice chair of the Fairgrounds Commissioners Board. He was joined by Norm Parton of Parton and Associates and Jason Bergeron of the Neighborhood Impact Advisory Committee. Thank you all for being here today. Really appreciate it. And we want to thank you for listening and tuning in this hour. Tomorrow, our city is famous for its hot chicken, but what about hot sauce? Woo! Get your glasses of milk ready. We're diving in. This is Nashville. It's a production of WPLN News and Nashville Public Radio. Listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get your podcasts. Our producers are Steve Harouche, Rose Gilbert, and Magnolia McKay. Our digital lead is Anna Gallegos-Cannon. Michaela Elias is our technical director. Our executive producer is Andrea Tudhope. The masterminds behind our theme music are Laurent and Amir Blade. Special thanks to Shay Sapp. The conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram and let us know what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekulona. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody, and be good to each other.